This episode is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Do you ever think about switching insurance companies to see if you could save some cash? Progressive makes it easy to see if you could save when you bundle your home and auto policies. Try it at Progressive.com. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Potential savings will vary. Not available in all states.
Ready to make a real impact every day? Join the Active Day Home Care team and help clients maintain their independence in the comfort of their own homes. Make a difference in someone's life as you provide essential daily assistance and protect their health and happiness. Earn up to $20 an hour and enjoy additional perks like optional daily pay, 401k, paid time off, ongoing educational training, and more. Join a team that values care, compassion, and your professional growth. Visit activeday.com to apply.
I'm Laurah Norton, and this is One Strange Thing, the show where we search the nation's news archives for stories that can't quite be explained. Strangers, we've often pointed out that in this wild and beautiful country, certain regions, and particular states, are known for their own special flavors of the paranormal. The Southwest is famous for UFOs, thanks to Roswell, and all those pesky saucer crash rumors, and, the Area 51 goings-on. When it comes to New England, well, there's apparently at least one ghost per landmark, and maybe even one per home. Actually, if you're in New Hampshire, please visit your attic right now and report back to us. And while the Pacific Northwest is indisputably the land of Bigfoot, we would argue there's another place where supernatural critters feel right at home. Is it any surprise that we're talking about the very heart of Appalachia? After all, as our official One Strange Thing merchandise slogan so aptly states, West Virginia is for cryptids. It's a shame, really, that the state never adopted that as its official motto, because the mountain state is practically teeming with the paranormal. And on a personal level, we would make a lot of money if they ever did. We could spend all day discussing their bounty of weird. There's the Flatwoods Monster, Mothman, Sheep Squatch. The list goes on. There's something about West Virginia, and really all of Appalachia, that stirs the imagination. It's a region that breeds the unexplainable. And as for logistics, well, who cares? Especially when it comes to sheep squatch, which is somehow exactly what it sounds like. Don't worry, we'll get to that weirdo one day. But a mutant sheep is not what we're here to discuss this episode. Today, we want to introduce you to another, lesser-known member of the West Virginia squad. This cryptid, the Grafton Monster, has a lot going for it. Somehow, it's alleged to be both headless and seal-like, which is a pretty big accomplishment. It was first spotted by a reporter for a local newspaper, the ideal witness, some might say, or a very suspect one. It all depends on how slow the news day was. Our setting is north-central West Virginia in the town of Grafton. According to its official website, the town is best known for being the birthplace of Mother's Day, which has absolutely nothing to do with this cryptid, we hope, but we're here to set the scene. It's a former railroad town that's home to the state's only national cemetery. Now, Grafton is currently home to around 5,000 people, and that's roughly the same population that there was back in 1964, when the town became famous for something besides really appreciating their mothers. The whole story centers on a man named Robert Cockrell, who then lived in Grafton. Robert Cockrell would eventually go on to work in the power industry. He'd actually spend most of his career in that field, but for an apparently exciting period of his life, he was a reporter for the Grafton Sentinel, a reporter who drove right into the story of a lifetime. We should probably mention that Robert was 17 years old at the time, which is a fascinating age for a newspaper man to be. It may also explain the rest of this story. Anyway, it all began one night in June. Per Monsters of West Virginia, Robert had worked late on the evening of June 16th and didn't leave the newspaper office until well after 10 p.m. His route home took him on the aptly named Riverside Drive, a road that twisted through the woods and along the Tigard Valley River. He was reportedly driving fast, around 50 miles an hour, and he hadn't seen another car for a long time. So, when his headlights fell across something along the riverbank, it was all the more surprising. According to Monsters of West Virginia, he glimpsed a figure that seemed, quote, immediately out of place. Not an object, but, quote, a thing that was standing along the riverbank. And it was a very large thing. Definitely not human. Even from a distance, it was clear to Robert that this hulking figure was, quote, 7 to 9 feet tall and was about 4 feet wide. And as he drew closer, he saw that, quote, it was stark white with slick, seal-like skin, or a covering that resembled sealskin. It had no head. Now, what it means exactly to have no head, we don't know. We are aware of, say, headless horsemen, but this is a weirder composition, especially when we're imagining something like a monstrous seal. Was there a neck? Shoulders? Do seals have necks or shoulders? Are we overthinking this? He apparently didn't mean beheaded because Monsters of West Virginia notes that Robert insisted that he could tell the thing was, quote, alive. Robert later wrote a letter detailing the events of that night to a Fortean magazine editor, and he'd also go on to cover the ensuing local excitement in 2 articles. But his personal experiences, he kept those a little closer to the chest. Luckily, that letter to the editor remains. The skeptical inquirer was kind enough to share it in full. In his original recollection of the sighting, Robert wrote that, quote, although I was genuinely tempted to go home and lock the doors, it is my business as a reporter to investigate a story and find out the truth. Well, strangers, we appreciate that, as we are not as devoted to our own craft. But Robert was wise enough not to return alone, and he decided he'd wrangle up a few friends to join him. He managed to collect 2, Jim Mauser and Jerry Morse. What exactly they thought they were getting into, we don't know, but they headed back out to the road with Robert. And what did they find? Well, not much. Per the Eagle Dispatch, quote, there was no sign of the creature once they got there, but the grass where it had been standing was crushed, and a low whistling noise followed them as they looked for the monster. Now, if you're not from an Appalachian state, we should mention, whistling at night, it's not something anyone wants to hear. In fact, you're very much advised not to engage in that practice. Think about it this way. If you call out, you never know who might answer. But Robert did not comment on this particular bit of knowledge as far as we know. Per his letter, he wrote that, quote, the sound appeared to follow us, but we could never track it down. At this point, I would like to say that I am sure it was not a practical joke nor a figment of my imagination. It's an interesting time for business. Tariff and trade policies are dynamic, supply chains are squeezed, and cash flow, it's tighter than ever. If your business can't adapt in real time, you're in a world of hurt. You need total visibility from global shipments to tariff impacts to real-time cash flow. That's NetSuite by Article, your AI-powered business management suite, trusted by over 41,000 businesses. NetSuite is the #1 cloud ERP for many reasons. It brings accounting, financial management, inventory, HR into one suite. You have one source of truth, giving you the visibility and control that you need to make quick decisions. With real-time forecasting, you're peering into the future with actionable data. And with AI embedded throughout, you can automate a lot of those everyday tasks, letting your team stay strategic. NetSuite helps you know what's stuck, what it's costing you, and how to pivot fast. When it's time for our business to level up, I know exactly what we'll use. NetSuite by Oracle. It's one system, full control, tame the chaos with NetSuite. If your revenues are at least in the 7 figures, download the free ebook, Navigating Global Trade, 3 Insights for Leaders at netsuite.com/strange. That's netsuite.com/strange. Apparently, word traveled fast in Grafton because within a day or two, other people were out by the river to search for the monster themselves. Local teenagers made up most of the crowd, not really a surprise considering their lack of YouTube for entertainment. And it was not long before a crowd had gathered in the woods. Per Monsters of West Virginia, they were armed with, quote, flashlights, mallets, crowbars, bats, and other crude weapons, thronged at the river at night in hopes of tangling with the headless horror. Allegedly, more than 20 searchers said they saw it, including at the, quote, nearby stone quarry. Questioned individually by the Sentinel, their accounts tallied, quote, to the finest detail. One youth declared that the creature must be, quote, an escaped polar bear, though he offered no explanation as to how a polar bear might arrive in Grafton on its own. And this is not the first time that we've heard that explanation, or even the second, so we can't really blame the Grafton teen for such an assumption. According to the Sentinel article on the hunt, a local theory quickly developed. The creature was not native to Grafton. Rather, locals claimed, it had first been seen in Morgantown and had somehow traveled via the river system to their own town. The paper did note that the creature evoked another recent monster sighting in Michigan, implying perhaps that the locals had been inspired. But did that include their own reporter? Well, a second article published in the Sentinel just a day after the first, on June 19th, it seemed to put a damper on things. The unnamed author, who was likely the paper's editor, put the monster fever down to a combination of boredom, spring fever, and, quote, a lack of area recreation facilities, which could honestly explain a lot of cryptid sightings if you think about it. The article even offered a theory as to what Robert might have seen that first night on the road. Quote, a routine check by the Sentinel showed that the monster story may have resulted from the fact that an individual pushing a handcart loaded high with boxes walked along Riverside Drive on Tuesday night. In the half-light of the late evening, this person and the loaded handcart apparently took on a weird shape for persons having just read the story of the Michigan Monster. It's fairly certain that monsters don't go around pushing handcarts loaded with boxes. That is a reasonable enough explanation. Except, no one bothers to explain why someone would have been pushing a handcart full of boxes along a riverbank at 11 p.m., or who it could have possibly been. According to Monsters of West Virginia, this answer might not have satisfied Robert either, as he apparently continued to investigate himself. Now, Robert did find reports of sightings of a monster up and down the river, including in Morgantown, that had not been publicized. In fact, he found one dating back as early as 1952. He even got in touch with the magazine editor we mentioned earlier, a man named Gray Barker, who had a particular interest in UFOs. Gray Barker had a possible theory on what Robert had experienced. That whistling sound that Robert and his friends had heard might have been the noise of a UFO retrieving a being that it had deposited on the Earth. But not a full-fledged alien, a kind of test species who'd been placed there to check out the environment. He likened it to, quote, first depositing an experimental animal, probably monkeys, on the surface of a planet before getting out ourselves. So, was this odd, whistling monster some kind of alien, or a man who had an urge to push some boxes along a river in the middle of nowhere and then disappear to do a little whistling after midnight? We certainly don't know, and as we researched the story, we thought we'd never find out. It seemed impossible, except for one strange thing. It turned out that after all that trouble, Robert had recanted the entire story. But no one seems to have paid any attention to it, at least not in the world of Grafton Monster lore. That recantation took place in a single letter to the editor written in 2014. That was, of course, the 50-year anniversary of the whole affair. it was published in the Mountain Statesman. That's the paper that absorbed the Grafton Sentinel. And we only have access to this thanks to the Skeptical Inquirer, which did the hard work of finding the physical archived copy. The author tracked it down when he heard that Robert Cockrell had recanted his sighting, apparently in response to an unflattering portrayal of Grafton in a TV special. And strangers, the story Robert told in that missive, it pretty much blew up his earlier monster investigation. To which we can only say, wow, Robert. So, as we told you early in the episode, Robert was only 17 when he reported on the Grafton Monster. By the time the 50th anniversary rolled around, he'd spent decades working for a local power company, and he'd left his career in paranormal journalism long behind. Whatever investigation Robert might have done as a youth, it seems that by the time 2014 had rolled around, things had changed, though his affection for the subject had never waned. Now, on to that letter to the editor. Robert opened with the following. The Grafton Monster would have turned 50 years old in June of this year. It was a good old monster. Its description was vague enough not to be too scary, but interesting enough to give folks something to chase one warm summer evening. It came into being on a dark night in June of 1964 as an unexplained shape by the side of the road, and it was fleshed out by the rumor mill, dressed up and sent on its way with each new telling of the tale. Now, he implied a little later on that he truly believed in the monster at one point. The 17-year-old part-time reporter for the Grafton Sentinel told his friends what he thought he saw in the dark on Riverside Drive, and by the time he heard the story repeated back to him by another friend, it had become a full-blown monster, and the hunt was on. He pointed out that his editor, quote, saw the story for what it was, and that, strangers, was both a good story and the young reporter's honest belief in a monster. But they had to follow up pretty quickly with that whole handcart box explanation, Robert said, because too many people were gathering on the road, and it was getting dangerous. You know, we thought that was a weird solution. That said, Robert did come up with an answer, eventually, that made sense to him. He doesn't explain when or how in his letter, but it seems to have clicked somewhere along the way. Maybe it was years later. Maybe it was very soon after, but things had already gotten out of hand. In any case, in his 2014 editorial, he offered this explanation for what he saw on the road, way back in 1964. In the light of day, the monster was most likely a fixture on the Grafton roadways and a local character by the name of Tommy Peters. He could be seen riding his bicycle all over town, at all hours of the night and day. He always had it loaded down with his finds for the day. On the night of the monster sighting, he was pedaling down Riverside Drive in the dark, and without a light, loaded down with boxes piled high on the back of his bicycle. Approaching him from behind at the highway speed, all you saw would be a large dark shape moving between the road and the river. You know, we have to wonder if anyone else came up with that solution. Especially Tommy Peters, who we imagine could have seen Robert that night and might have been surprised to find himself described as a headless seal monster. It's not that different from a guy with a handcart, we suppose, but a bicycle is a lot more practical for hauling packages through the mountains, and honestly, less weird. As far as we can tell, this recantation made absolutely zero waves on the Grafton Monster scene. It might be the lack of available digitized copies of the Mountain Statesman, or it might be the fact that it's not much fun to say that you confused a monster with a bicycle, or the slight suspicion that Robert wrote the letter because he was mad at the producers of a television show, and not because he was truly recanting at all. That's a slight hope, of course, but the paranormal enthusiasts, they can dream. In any case, it hasn't dampened Grafton's enthusiasm for the monster. The town hosts an annual festival dedicated to their cryptid, as they should. If you ever stop in, email and let us know. We've never gotten to attend a single critter festival, which is pretty tragic. We can only imagine the paranormal delights that might await us. So, if you ever make it over to West Virginia, drop in and buy us a Grafton Monster bumper sticker. And, hey, be sure to wear one of our t-shirts while you're there. We need to move some of this merchandise. We hope you'll join us next time for another real-life story from the fine print of America's local papers. From the lives of regular people, just like you and me, except for one strange thing. One Strange Thing is an independent podcast. To support the show and to hear more of the entirely true and enticingly peculiar, you can check out our premium offerings. If you'd like to subscribe on Apple Premium, we've established a new feed where you'll get both premium and ad-free episodes. If you subscribe on Patreon, you'll find ad-free releases of our regular episodes, 2 full-length bonus episodes, monthly giveaways, and blog posts, all for $5 a month. We hope you'll check out one of these options and support the show. There's a link in the show notes. And if you enjoy One Strange Thing, please take a moment to leave us a great rating or review on your favorite podcast app. It really helps. This episode is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Do you ever think about switching insurance companies to see if you could save some cash? Progressive makes it easy to see if you could save when you bundle your home and auto policies. Try it at Progressive.com. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Potential savings will vary. Not available in all states.